Wonderful. This is wonderful. Wow, this is great. Wow, look at all my friends and colleagues that are here tonight. Well, let me set up some, this is wonderful. And oh, who's that? Is that Sunny? Over there? I'm not sure who that is. Sunny is here actually, but her camera's off. We have other colleagues here. Hi, Sunny. Wonderful to see you all. And a couple of my students in here as well, which is really great to see. Let me start off just by, since I thank the organizers and others for being here today, and you can turn your cameras off if you're more comfortable with that, and we can save bandwidth for others. I just wanted a quick glance, although I may have to call on Danielle to bail me out because I think he's probably better informed than I am about many of the things that I'll be trying to talk about today. How do you like the lighting in here? It's a little odd tonight. I don't have my usual tools here. All right, wait a minute. Folk Center for International Business is with us tonight? How exciting is that? Thanks for joining. So let me start by just saying that what I want to do today is relate to you some of the work that I did with my colleague Ralph Bolton and Hoover Aguirre Torres, who is an anthropologist from the Altiplano of Peru. And they are, although I'm responsible for any mistakes I make here tonight, none of this would be happening if they hadn't invited me to join them to do some writing about a place called Chichnaya. And I'm now sharing, I think, probably the wrong slide, but I'll fix that real quick. No, this is the right slide. That's good news. I'm working on multiple computers here, so it may take me just a moment. Bear with me while I get those things arranged the way I want them to be. Yeah, okay. So what you're seeing here on your screen are two little huellas. These are little artisanal products that come from the region around Cusco in Peru. And these little huellas, these oxen, painted up and decorated, are a thing that you'll find in tourist stores all over the region. And they also represent an important thing about the Altiplano. So it's kind of a nice way to kick off because you can see the beautiful mountains in the distance. And you may be sitting at between 10 and 12,000 feet if you're seeing a view like this of these two little critters on the roof. I'm going to move another screen here so we can move around appropriately. Right. Easy enough. Well, back we go. I'm going to start by asking you guys a question, and I'd like to hear from you. And then what this is an opportunity for me to think bigger about the issues that I face as a practicing or an applied anthropologist. And that means somebody who spent a career looking at communities in the United States and in China and in some cases in Latin America and trying to understand what's going on there. That's the big ethnographer's question. Ethnographers could be anthropologists, could be sociologists, could be business researchers who spend time up close and personal with the people they're trying to understand. We call it experience near research. It doesn't mean we don't also, step back and look at the big demographic pattern. It doesn't mean that we don't look in detail at other kinds of maybe numerical data, the kinds of stuff you might be more familiar with in an economics class or in a lot of the business research that's done because folks have access to those kinds of data. But in developing environments and developing countries, so-called developing countries, I want to say so-called because it gives you a hint that somehow developing countries are lacking in things. It's maybe best to think of approaching those kinds of communities from a standpoint of what's really going on there and what are the things they bring to the table to survive as many thousands of years as many of these communities have. And that's the case in the Altiplano. So let me start off again by saying that What you're seeing here is a slide for those of you who may have difficulty seeing the slide because of bandwidth or other things. I'll try to be accessible in my language here. So this slide asks 5 questions that I wanted to address at the beginning, and I also want to address at the end. That's why the slide is at the bottom. I should have moved it. I thought I did. Anyway, it says, what is entrepreneurship? It says, what about in so-called developing countries? And what about in the Altiplano of Peru? We'll talk about where the Altiplano is and what that means in a second. And why do so many development schemes fail? That is, interventions by outside experts to help people out who are having difficulties economically, difficulties with their communities, with agriculture, with having enough money to survive, dealing with poverty. And can outsiders really make a difference in those cases? So thinking through tonight about what the big questions are, for me, a lot of those big questions are probably folded into the questions on the list here. So I think it would be fun to ask you guys what you think about this list of questions before I talk about the Altiplano. And let me ask you as well, what you guys know about the Altiplano de Peru. Esa región super alto, right? This region of the world that is so far up in the sky, you'll get nosebleeds, quite literally. And if you travel on a bus through this part of the country, as I haven't done recently, but did long ago, it's really cold at night at 12,000 feet, just a little ways south of the equator. So let me ask you guys, what are your thoughts about what's an entrepreneur in the context of a developing economy, a rural economy, a place where subsistence agriculture that just is enough to meet the needs of a household, is kind of the dominant thing? What do you think about that? You guys can unmute perhaps, or maybe I even have the power to do that. I don't think I do. Others do.
Yes,
anyway.
This is Mackenzie. I just want to say everybody should be able to unmute themselves, and you can also answer anything in the chat, and I can read that out loud for everybody.
Perfect, thank you. I might pick on Danielle because I know he's brave and fearless. Danielle is one of our fine PhD students here at the University of South Carolina, who comes to us from Mexico. What is this? How do you make sense of entrepreneurship in this kind of context?
Hey, Dr. Erickson, is
yes.
Jan Smoke.
Hi, Jan.
Throw this out here. You know, I think about it being like more of a family or cultural endeavor in a lot of ways. Like things are passed down over the years, and how people have earned their living, I guess. I'm not as familiar with developing countries, but that's just my impression.
There's a key word in what Jan just shared. Thank you, Jan. The word for me is family. If you're working in Latin America, ¿no es cierto? ¿Ah? Cuando estamos hablando de México, estamos hablando de familiares, de family. When we're talking about Mexico, we're talking about family. So now on your screen, you see everyone. If anyone else wants to jump in, feel free to jump in. And I don't have to pick on Danielle, but it's kind of fun to do so. What happens in Mexico with communities of this kind? Because they're found in Mexico all over the place. Is there such a thing as community entrepreneurship in a place like Mexico?
Yes, in certain places, it's very common. The family-oriented work.
So again, the idea of family orientation, does that seem to be key for you when you think about those places and how they work?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. All right, well, you guys keep those questions. You know, there's another way you can get questions to us here. The chat is open. And my colleague, Mackenzie, is keeping an eye on the chat. So if you guys would like to add something, it should be pretty easy for you guys to do that. So let's think some more about where we're going here. Let's go.
Yeah, the concept of entrepreneurship is to last for generations. They are to start a family business and then pass it on to the son and then to the grandson. And it's different from the US, I guess, because in the US, entrepreneurship is more about developing business and then selling them, and then develop another one and then sell it, right? Probably that's the different approach.
Yeah, I'll buy that. That's one of the things that I've certainly read in the entrepreneurship literature, and it's certainly something that you see when you go out and talk to people who call themselves entrepreneurs. The reason this question is of interest to me is that as a practicing anthropologist, as someone who uses the tools of anthropology and the social sciences generally to understand human communities, is that I've found that in the United States, there are exactly the kinds of entrepreneurs that you just mentioned, that there are people who are, they call themselves serial entrepreneurs. We have some of them among our students who've started a business, get it going, and then move on to something else, maybe sell it for a profit each time. And I know if you talk to organizations like the Kauffman Foundation, which is based out of Kansas City, I think it's Kauffman, if I'm correct, I believe so. They do an awful lot of funding to help understand how entrepreneurship works, with the idea that if they focus there, these businesses can grow and employ a lot of people. But we already know that small and very small businesses employ the majority of people in the United States and even in the world. But the idea of taking an idea and growing it up seems to be central to our notion of entrepreneurship. And what I'm going to suggest here is that that's only one way to view what's going on with entrepreneurs, that there are other kinds of entrepreneurs. So the image that you see in front of you, I've just put on the screen, is a woman who lives in Chichnaya. We're talking about a community at about 12,000 feet above sea level, very high up. And you see that she's got a transportation tool right there in the form of what looks like a pretty cool BMX bike. And attached to that is a milk can, because she's one of the farmers in Chichnaya who brings milk twice a day to a cheese processing plant. That's the focus of the story here, and the focus of some questions that I think it raises about the nature of entrepreneurship and about the ways in which we usually think about who is an entrepreneur. You might think of Steve Jobs or one of our students working in one of these entrepreneurial centers, one of these incubators, right? This is another kind of entrepreneur. This is a local entrepreneur from Chichnaya in the highlands of Peru. So let me just spend a second or two talking about Peru. Has anybody, you could do a raise hands. I'd love to know if anybody's, been to Peru. I think that would be fascinating to understand. I'm not sure if anyone in this room has been to Peru. Who's been to Peru? Anyone? Speak up. I thought somebody
Dr. Erickson, I did want to say the question came through in the chat from Sierra, and she just asked, is there community entrepreneurship that extends beyond the family unit? And I also want to mention my mom is on this call, and she was in Peru, very close to this area recently.
Oh, cool. So the question is, does it extend beyond the family unit?
Yes.
Wow, it's such a good question. And I'd say probably, and probably in ways that are a little bit surprising. But I think that the family is probably going to be, we have to think about what we mean when we say family, when we're talking about Latin America in general, and when we're talking about the Altiplano de Peru in particular. So there we are, back again. Just wave at me if you can't hear me. We're looking at a slide now that contains a map of Peru with the terrain feature turned on Google Maps. And what you're seeing there is you see the ocean in the lower left and a big green swath of essentially the Amazon basin in the upper right-hand corner of the photograph. This photo is on the right hand of the slide here. And then in the middle, you've got the Altiplano region, which extends from La Paz and even beyond La Paz into the north of Chile, all the way up somewhere. There's Cusco right in the middle. I could move my mouse over Cusco. You get a sense of how big this is. And then Lake Titicaca. The area we're going to focus on is around north of Juliaca. Juliaca is the largest city in the Altiplano on the shores of Lake Titicaca. So what do you need to know about this place? First of all, it's very high. It's pretty dry, although near the lake, you can get maybe 30 inches of rain a year. That's not the case further inland. There are plains here. It's open desert looking country, except that it's very cold, and there will be frost 250 nights a year. This place was the site of Tuantinsuyu, which we know as the Inca state, an empire that extended from southern Colombia all the way to central Chile with road systems connecting the communities throughout the region. That's what was encountered by Pizarro and the conquistadores, right? The guys from Spain who thought they had discovered something. Well, you know, of course it had been there for a long time, but for them it was new, and they called the place the Inca country, right? So primarily Quechua and Aymara speakers in this part of the world, although Spanish is the language of communication and trade, and in most cases schooling as well. Although there's a big effort to, you know, make sure that Aymara and Quechua get supported in the schools and elsewhere. And then the last thing it says on this slide is tremendously important to understand what's going on in El Altiplano. And that's the idea of multiple environmental zones. And you can see on this map, you know, you don't have to go too far. The distance between La Paz and Juliaca is about 100 miles as the crow flies. So it's really not all that far to the coast. And the coast is dry. But these river valleys coming down from the Altiplano all have water, especially at certain times of the year, the rainy season, which is their wintertime, our summertime, generally speaking. Those rivers produce villages that can irrigate crops and that can grow crops in ways that can't be grown in the Altiplano. And the Altiplano itself has two distinct regions too. There's the really cold high Altiplano, and then the Tierra Fria up high, and the regular Altiplano, which is just plain old cold. But in the daytime, maybe 70 degrees. In the wintertime at night, it could be 0 or even below that, and then get back up to 40 and 50 degrees during the day. Wyoming can be a little bit like that. The main point here to know is that the people who lived here took advantage of those different environmental zones. And that's one of the things that makes this part of the world incredibly special. And it makes understanding small communities really complicated, because you don't just look at the community, you look at the communities nearby. You look at the communities where you have some family, maybe down the hill, or where you have an exchange or a trading relationship. So that if you're up on the Altiplano back in the day and you're raising llamas and alpacas, if you're raising these 4-footed ungulates, right? Although there was never the wheel to move people around in this civilization, there was certainly ungulates who could carry loads on their backs, and it was a pastoral society for many people there. Pastoralism meaning they made their living as herders. But those multiple environmental zones are understood by archaeologists as the key to understanding why this was an area of really significant population, of very complex state organization, complex religious systems, and very complex systems of exchange and trade that still have an impact today. So you've got lowlands, you've got mountain slopes, you've got high mountains, you've got coastal valleys. And the idea to remember here is this idea of multiple environmental zones. So how do people survive? We use the word subsistence in anthropology to talk about the economic system that exists even before the invention of money, right? That's maybe one of the little added values an anthropologist can bring to the table for a business school, is that, you know, economists are great at looking at fiscally based economies that are money based, right? But in the span of human history, that's this much, while the rest of human history is clear over by my door over here, right? So there have been economists like Karl Polanyi and others who've developed ways of thinking about how economic systems work before money. And so you need to understand that kind of thinking to understand how folks in the Altiplano managed to survive in such a place. So first of all, you got pastoralism, and the picture here on this slide, and the slide says subsistence adaptations to the Altiplano. And it's a picture of, looks like alpacas. I know they're not vicuñas because that's the wild variety. You know, there's vicuñas, there's alpacas and llamas, and as I understand it, the alpacas and llamas, right? There's the ones that are the domestic animals, right? And you can see a herder taking care of them here on the Altiplano. It looks like it's probably been rainy. So that's the first kind of adaptation to this environment. you've got domesticated animals. And those can provide fiber for clothing or for the manufacture of something that's not on the slide deck called the quipu, which is a system of writing in which people tie little knots on strings of alpaca and llama fur that they, you make them out of yarn. And you tie those little knots and they communicate to the guy in the other town what's going on in your town. Some of those things have been discovered, in fact, by a business student who was studying, get this, a business student at Harvard, I think he was a junior or a senior, and he was taking a certification in big data analytics. He was studying data analytics. And for fun, he took a course from an archaeologist who specializes in what's going on in the Altiplano. And this archaeologist, I should have his name, but it's such a great story, it doesn't matter, was trying to figure out, based on all the evidence they'd had for years and years, how to interpret these quipu strings that were so important and such a big part of how the Inca state sort of shared information from one place to another. They knew these strings had meaning. They had sorted out kind of what they were, but they weren't sure. He applied his B school analytic studies skills to unpack this thing. He noticed patterns that hadn't been found before. How cool is that? Brought it to the professor, and the professor went, "Oh my gosh, we have to publish this. It's so cool." Look it up. I'm not making the story up. So, the connection between this environment, this pastoralism, and the development of a complex system of transferring meaning away from human beings speaking. You can't call it writing, a symbolic system that's fixed on quipu. And it turns out was super important to recording what? Debts. What is owed? We've got X number of storehouses full of grain and X number of storehouses full of jerky, and X number of storehouses full of freeze-dried potatoes. Freeze-drying, did you know that was invented in the Altiplano? You got to keep track of those kinds of things. That's the way states work. They keep track of things, right? We know that from cuneiform and the temples in the Tigris and Euphrates River, right? Early human beings, when they get to writing stuff, often write down things like, how much beer do you owe me? Okay, so let's look at what else this slide says. That was a sidebar. I couldn't resist. It says pastoralism, llamas and alpacas. Then it says terracing. Well, we've seen the pictures of the terraces in China, right? Where you can level out a little piece of a hillside and then you can plant something in it. The same thing takes place in the highlands of Peru and in lots of other places in the world for that matter. Terracing does more than just keep the land from sliding away and provide a flat place to plant things. Terracing also means that you're creating microclimates. One side of the hill might be a little sunnier than the other. If you have a terrace, you can be a little sheltered from the wind and the cold. You see what I'm saying? So the idea is that terracing is actually a very complicated and very subtle kind of way of managing the land in this Altiplano environment, terracing. The next one is one that I'm not an expert in, but it's an old idea that comes from a guy named John Murra. He's a famous anthropologist who only published in Spanish until late in his life because he believed in working in Peru and publishing in Peru, kind of a cool guy. He's the guy who came up with this idea of vertical zones being really important to understand civilization in this part of the world. The word here on the slide is frost management. What a concept. We know this is a place with 250 days of frost per year. What do you do with that? Is that a problem or is it an opportunity? Somebody figures out that if you leave the potatoes out in the cold and then the sun comes out the next day and dries them out and then they freeze again and dry out again in the sun and freeze and dry and freeze and dry, and pretty soon you've got freeze-dried food that can be preserved in a storehouse for a long time. So effective that one of Pizarro's colonels was bringing a force of Spanish soldiers with horses across the Altiplano, and he was able to feed his army off of stores that had been there for years. So freeze drying is an important technological innovation in here. Maybe it wasn't an entrepreneurial innovation, but it certainly was something special about the Altiplano. We've all heard the word jerky. Who knew that it comes arguably, I'm always suspicious of these kind of it comes from arguments, but The idea is that the word in Aymara is charqui. It could be a Quechua word, don't quote me, hence jerky, dried meat, right? There was a road network, that's the next thing here, that connected these villages. If it's really rotten weather part of the year where I live, maybe it's not so rotten at the same time of the year somewhere else. You need a road network to move things around to keep people fed, essentially. Next, at contact, I said massive storehouses. And the evidence here archaeologically, on one hillside near Cochabamba, and Cochabamba is kind of off the highlands down in Bolivia, beautiful city. I am told, some of my family members have visited, I have not, says 2,400 storehouses on one hillside near Cochabamba and over 1,000 above Huausha, and I don't know where that is. So these storehouses were tremendously important for the people in Inca times. Then you have, you know, the Spanish show up and the state collapses and there's diseases and a lot of people die. And a lot of the knowledge about how to work in this environment and sort of subsist at such a level that you can support big cities like Cusco kind of gets lost. But not entirely. And that's kind of the interesting story here, is that folks in this part of the world are especially resilient. So let's look in detail about the area that we're learning about here. And I should say at the outset that this is work that's been done by a guy named Ralph Bolton, who's a colleague of mine. And I'm just a junior author on a piece of work that he put together with Hoover, whose name was up on the very first slide, Hoover Aguirre Torres, who is the anthropologist who lives down in this part of the world and with whom I've been corresponding back and forth for the past several months to kind of keep an eye on what's going on in this area. So you see Lake Titicaca here on the slide from the Google Maps, and you see a red dot, and that red dot represents the community of Pucara. And on the right-hand side is a map. You can see the inset of Peru, and in the lower right-hand corner of Peru, kind of the south central part right there on the Altiplano is where the district of Pucara is located. This map just shows the various municipios, the various recognized communities in the area. And on the right-hand side, you see the road that runs between Cusco in the north down to Juliaca, the largest city in the Altiplano, and eventually to Puno and to La Paz, Bolivia. This would be a longer discussion about how these communities relate to one another, and that's something that Hoover can talk about, but I really cannot. But it does point out a few features on the map that are important to know about. First of all, Pucara is up here. It's not down here toward the lake in Juliaca, I mean. And we have a Fábrica Comunal de Queso. We have a communal cheese factory, not just one near Pucara, because there is one near Pucara, actually around the corner in the town of Chichnaya. But there are 4 others. And that situation is changing right now under COVID. I've just gotten some new news about that just over the past couple of days. So we get the idea that we're pastoralists. So maybe milk production makes sense here. And what we're seeing is some of these communities have followed the model that Chichnaya developed, not on its own, but with the help of a number of outside folks coming in to help out, and certainly on their own having the sort of wherewithal to get this thing together. So this is not a tremendously unique community in the sense that there are others also doing entrepreneurial stuff with the agricultural products that they have available to them. Let's see. So let me switch slides for a second. This is just an image of Pucara. This is, if you'd go down the road, and yes, it's Google Maps. There is a paved road that connects Cusco and the Puno region. This is the town of Pucara. If you drive further down this road and turn left and go around a mountainside, you come to another town, and this is the village that we're talking about here. This is the village of Chichnaya. And I'm going to kind of flip through a little bit of the history of this place for the next 10 minutes. Before I do that, let me stop. And this image here that you're seeing, gosh, I hope you have a good visual check on this, because it's a beautiful mountain valley, not a lot of trees. There's some bushes along what is, I believe, an irrigation ditch. You can see some cultivated fields, and you see a settled community stretched out along the road, the town of Chichnaya. Not a tremendously small place, but it does not have a paved road at this point. Does anyone have any questions about where we're at so far? Comments about the Altiplano or the things that I mentioned about sort of the Inca Empire? Kind of, maybe is that news to you or is it new? Oh, we've got some questions in chat perhaps. Maybe I should look at those and see what they say. Someone, oh, Katie, oh, Kaylee's been to Peru. Brilliant. It does look like a painting. Beautiful landscape. You know, that's one thing to remember too while we're trying to be, you know, social scientists and learn about things, is the experience of being in one of these places is just very special. And the folks who live there know that and appreciate it as well. So I'm glad you do too. Human beings like to appreciate where they live. Let me turn to some of the things that have been written by my colleagues about this place. And if you'll pardon me, I'll try to summarize rather than read, but it makes for a good story anyway. And I'll leave this slide up here so you can kind of breathe in this rarefied air and see that blue sky above the city of Chichinaya. 12,500 feet above sea level, the Altiplano is a vast high plateau in the central Andes. By the time 2017 rolls around, we're talking about 1,172,000 people in this area. That's pretty remarkable considering that in the 1960s, there were only about 700,000 people in this area. So clearly questions about subsistence and making a living and getting along in such a difficult environment have to be top of mind for people, right? So what happened was, let me go back to the map just a second. I'll pop back up to that other slide. In fact, why not take advantage of the technology? Let me do this if I can, and if my computer will allow me to do so. There we see West Colombia on the map. Let's fly to Pucara. Or better yet, let's go to Puno. Let's fly to Puno, Peru real quick. Look at the water. Now you're seeing an image of Puno. If you wanted to, you could visit the CHL Hotel in Titicaca, but no one's going there now because of COVID, which raises a whole lot of other questions and problems. As we zoom out on this map, and we see the city of Juliaca appears up here in the north with all the roads leading to it, you get the sense that although Puno is maybe the better known community and sort of has a kind of the historical center there, that Juliaca has turned into the big regional center. Lake Titicaca with the border, and by the way, Lake Titicaca contains the Bolivian Navy, what's left of it after Chile. Well, there was this little war between Chile and Bolivia, and longer story. In any case, there is a Navy in Bolivia and it operates on Lake Titicaca, which is pretty cool, actually. If you go to a satellite view, check this out. This is not heavily forested country, but you can see on some of the high mountain peaks, we have snow and we have a lot of very dry country, and you can see just how mountainous and folded up this country is. Go back to the map. This area here, as you zoom in on Juliaca, we could even visit Juliaca with our little person here and see what it looks like. Hey, it looks like a town in the Andes, and we're here in the square. Might even look familiar to anyone who's been to Latin America, because you have to have a Zócalo. Tenemos un Zócalo porque somos de Latinoamérica. You got to have the town square. It just reminds me of Kansas, in fact, because there's always a town square. So the point I wanted to make here, besides just touring around and looking at the cool countryside, I am a real map addict myself, is to note that there are rivers coming in here to Lake Titicaca. Nothing drains out of Lake Titicaca. So if you have a bad rainfall event, and with the current climate emergency hitting Latin America, just like it's hitting everywhere else, we should have a moment of silence for people who live in Honduras, because they've been experiencing too much heavy rain. Extremes in weather are part of the order of the day, with the climate being what it is these days. And that has resulted in a number of floods. There was always flooding around these rivers, but starting in 1963, the folks who lived along this river, including the people who now live at Pucara, this river and this one up here, especially around Taraco, flooded like crazy. And people had to get out of there. And the government said, what should we do? Well, we'll send you some supplies. And then they flood again. And the government says, well, we'll send a commission and we'll try to do some things. But, you know, the government's in Lima. This is a far piece from Lima. And besides, you know, these are those rural, small communities. It's really hard to get resources into, and it's hard to have the political will to do that as well, without getting into a longer discussion of something way over my head, which is Peruvian politics. And these days, you need a couple of PhDs in political science who speak Aymara, Quechua, and Spanish to figure that one out. So what happened in 1963, the folks who now live in Chichinaya had been completely devastated by too many floods. And so what the community got together to do was to try and make something happen to fix this problem. And along comes a Peace Corps volunteer named Ralph Bolton, my friend, who's a emeritus anthropologist, applied person, gets involved in communities and tells stories and, you know, does research and does work to help them out. He's a Peace Corps volunteer, young guy, doesn't have his PhD, and he's working in this community, and he sees all this stuff going on. And a couple of the folks regionally who are also working, local Peruvians, trying to resolve this issue, come together and say, why don't we, you know, we have this new development agency called Corpuno, the corporate, I don't know, Department of Agrarian Reform. It's part of their Cooperation for Economic Development, a government agency in Peru, says, all right, we're going to work on this problem of this community that's constantly being flooded. And what they try to do is they get in touch with Ralph, who's the Peace Corps volunteer, and says, since you're there, see what you can do. And they get to working with some other folks. And at the end of the day, they find a hacienda. Hacienda means a big expanse of land owned by a wealthy landowner who usually has folks who don't own any land working on that hacienda. That's the old hacienda system of Latin America. Our whole notion of peasantry as a category of human social organization, if you will, comes from that idea. You've got a big landowner and landless peasants. Well, you know, the scene is much more complicated than that in reality in Peru, but what happens was they found a hacienda that was owned by the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church said, you know, they had a bishop who was kind of friendly to folks at this time in the region. And he said, you know what, you know, you guys have come and talked to me about this problem. And I know, you know, I've got this hacienda and I've got, you know, not very many people on it right now, and it's not doing much. We'll make you a heck of a deal. So they donate the land to the community. Then the next thing is, how do you organize a bunch of folks who are farmers, who are, by the way, very independent people and entrepreneurial in their own little family ways, to come together and live in a place like this? Well, remember, the history of Peru also includes a military coup in the 1960s, not far after this first big flood episode. This business of putting the community together and moving it didn't happen until 1969. But at one point in Peru's history, there was a land reform instituted by a military government that said, we're not going to have big landowners, we're going to partition the land up and have land reform. Como sabemos, eso siempre funciona muy bien en Mexico, ¿no es cierto? So you have, the ejido system in Mexico. This is an old story in a lot of parts of Latin America, and even in the United States in some instances with Native American communities and others that have maybe restricted access to land that was traditionally there. So in any case, what happens? They move this community. Imagine that, taking an entire community. Well, not everybody wanted to move, but about 72, 73 families decided they were going to do this because Bishop Julio González Ruiz from Puno decided, yeah, I'm going to let you guys have this hacienda. So they decide to do this relocation project in this community. It's a pretty cool idea. When they did this, they said, we're going to make this a cooperative. Yeah, it was the 60s. Maybe that's the reason. I have to ask Aguirre why a cooperative model is what they wanted. They said, if you're going to be in on this thing, we're going to cooperate together. We're going to own the land together. We're going to have a cooperative governance structure. And right away, the trouble began because you have very independent families of farmers. So in any case, in the first season, 1963-64, I did get it correct. It was in the early 60s when they made the first move. Cheese comes later. That's what's right. They had planted 17 hectares of land, right? And they managed a pretty good harvest. They did pretty well in the first year, and people were thinking, hey, this move is going to work for us. We've had a good, we brought in improved seeds, and we've done some new things with fertilizer, and we brought in an agronomist to help us out, and we don't have tractors yet, but we think we can maybe survive. And then, well, then they had some serious frosts, and things got cold, and they lost their potato crop. So that wasn't working. So the next thing they did is they said, well, wait a minute, it's just, we're so much higher than we were before. We're further up the river. We're actually away from the river. We're up a couple of 1,000 feet higher than we were before. It's just too cold for our old agricultural practices to work. Let's look into cattle. We know about that. We have some folks that do that. So that's where they moved to, animal husbandry, with an emphasis on fattening cattle, which meant buying grain to do that. And it got complicated and it didn't work that well. But one of the things began to happen because of this new kind of entrepreneurial venture of saying, let's do cows instead. You didn't need the kids to watch the cows. And that meant the kids had a lot of free time. And some of the folks working in this area suggested, handcrafts are a good deal. Why don't we add that to the mix? You can just picture this community trying to come up with a way to survive. I'll read what Ralph said about it. In Chichnaya, children were not needed to pasture the animals belonging to the community. Consequently, all children, girls as well as boys, were required to go to school. And thanks to an idea proposed by a guy named Robert Purser, who was another Peace Corps volunteer, children were encouraged to become artists, embroidering village scenes on hand-spun woolen cloth, and their production of bordados. We're talking about kind of cross-stitchery, right? Doing art with fabric. Bordados became kind of a thing, and other villages began copying what they did, right? There was a woman named Remy Alexander, who was a U.S. aid expert in the area, who said, these are really cool pieces of handcraft. Why don't I show them to some people? And she got in touch with an American artist who, found a way to show the art in Lima, and eventually it got picked up by the Brooklyn Museum of Art, and eventually a traveling exhibition was done, and now you can find these things at the International Craft Fair in Santa Fe, New Mexico, still to this day. They say, and this is according to Ralph, that brought in $20,000 in 1967, which was some serious money for a small community. So what you begin to see is a pattern of entrepreneurialism, and this kind of answers your question too. There's outside actors coming in. It's not enough to think of this as an enclosed community. Never could, never would. No communities are that isolated. There might be an island somewhere left, but I doubt it. So we're trying the cattle, and then we're trying the handcrafts, but it's just kind of lumping along. 3 decades. The community continues to function as a cooperative with land, livestock, and machinery held in common. And then there's a 1969 agrarian reform, and they're able to purchase some more land, and things begin to grow, but problems begin to surface. And the community begins to find that some folks want to go one direction, some folks don't trust their neighbor with the finances, and there's problems with elections. Sound familiar? Communities have this. So what happens, what Ralph writes is this. He says, it's kind of amazing that the experiment in a cooperative village lasted as long as it did, because Altiplano campesinos, the people who live in El Campo, in the countryside, actually have a local tradition of owning their own family land. It's like, I don't know about this cooperative thing. I'm used to having my own plot of land. And one of the things that you will sometimes find in the literature is this idea that people in the highlands of Peru are essentially very cooperative. Well, it was true that under the Inca, there was an awful lot of sharing because you had to share. You know what I'm saying? The Inca state says, I will help you with your irrigation ditch, but you got to fill up the food store because, we're up high and you're down in the valley and we need that. And we're going to help you and you help us. So there were those kind of reciprocal exchange and obligation relationships that were there. That does not mean that individuals in these communities were not fiercely protective of their family's needs, right? So there's no kind of nice, let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. In the Altiplano, never was, but you might get that impression from some of the things you read. I know Ralph likes to talk about that for hours, that people get it wrong when they think that that's true. So things get to be a problem, but about 1969, they create a Milk Producers Association. The cattle business isn't that great, but they realize something that people in India have known for probably forever, which is that one cow can feed a family for a long time. Cow produces a lot of useful things. Produces manure for fertilizer, produces urine, which is a useful product as well. It produces cheese and milk and butter and ghee if you're in India. No reason to kill the thing and chop it up into pieces and serve it at the table when you have a living animal that can provide for an entire family. So what begins to happen is you begin to see dairy production and cheese production begin. A legally recognized business entity begins about this time in Chechnaya as they begin to own dairy cattle, and so did other neighboring communities. So they start a business and they create a cheese factory. What are we going to do with all this extra milk? Why do you have extra milk? Well, we've realized by now, living in the highlands, that we need better cattle, we need better feed, we have to have a covered enclosure for our cows. We didn't have that at first, and animals died. And you know, it's kind of inefficient laying out the food on the ground, although a lot of farmers and ranchers in Wyoming still do that. They needed feed troughs. They needed a more kind of better system to take care of the animals. And as they developed that, they found that they were producing more and more milk. They were growing and importing some alfalfa for these animals, right? There were new things happening in the world of agriculture, and these guys took advantage of it. So it's kind of cool. So the cheeses, they were making cheese with this communal herd of cows, and the production was basic. Large stones used to press the whey from the curds. You know, that's the stuff that you make ricotta cheese from, the whey. Well, they kind of threw out the whey. They actually get out the whey. No, we don't go there. They use that to feed the pigs or to feed the goats or to feed other animals, or else you just toss it, which is kind of a problem, in fact. But what they were doing was selling the cheese locally, and that worked pretty well. And then that kind of fell apart and then started again in 2000. They started to revitalize their cheese business. They ended up building a new facility. And here it is. By the time the 2000s rolled around, there are a couple of other state actors and NGOs, non-governmental organizations, beginning to work in this community. And you can see here a pretty well-designed little business place where you can bring your milk. A guy's bringing something in here. I can't tell what it is. You see people in their kind of traditional dress. You get the idea that motorcycles and bicycles are a good way to move around. This is the new cheese building that's put together for the village of Pucara. Caritas Peru was among the NGOs that worked on this. New kinds of alfalfa in the early 2000s begin to come in. So milk production goes up and cheese production goes up as well. From Daniel Marcelo Rodriguez, the art of association becomes the mother of all action, studied and applied by all, said Alexis de Tocqueville. Thank you for that lovely quote. Yeah, it's true. It's not one person that does stuff, right? Get together, trade ideas. It's what entrepreneurs like to do. So the first mayor, we have a mayor and they get support and it goes through this thing. And at the end of the day, they end up with a pretty healthy little cheese business, right? They organize it in such a way. This is a very community kind of way. They say, okay, everybody's going to take a turn working in this place, because when you work in the cheese place, you're going to get a regular wage, which is a good thing, right? Now, if we had regular employees, they could be better trained, and you could have maybe more sort of rational organization in the place. You could have right now there's two bosses, and then these guys kind of come and go. So this becomes maybe not the most efficient kind of cheese making organization in the world, but certainly was working. So they begin to get loans from some of these NGOs, and things move along, and the enterprise is tight with the local government. It's all kind of working together, and it's a small town, and then it's going okay. Just to give you a sense of how this works, and you can look at, let's go back to this image of the woman with her bicycle and the cheese. Every morning that starts at 5:30 in the morning as people are tending their cows. You got to get up in the morning. If you've ever worked with animals, you take care of your animals first and yourself second, and that's true around the world. take care of the animals, feed and water the animals, then you've got to milk. And if there's anyone in this room that comes from a dairying family, it's not a huge industry in South Carolina, but it's there. You got to milk on time or you have unhappy cows. And then, you know, you're going to feed again in the middle of the day, and then you're going to milk again at the end of the day. So you have 2 opportunities to collect milk and then take it into the cheese factory and sell the milk. So this is the daily thing. The factory opens, the cheese factory opens about 8 o'clock. The workers begin to take in the milk from the folks. They wash the molds, the tanks, the tables, the presses, the pots, the buckets, the instruments, the other cheese making equipment, and go about their daily work. And now they have a secretary who takes notes about who's brought what into the place. I don't have images of exactly that. But one of the interesting things to me is if you look at this other slide, you'll see some interesting things. I'm going to stop the share just for a minute to turn this on because I want to play just a little bit of what this operation, not the cheese making, but the collection of milk in a small village actually looks like. The reason I bring this up is because this is not just an altiplano thing. This is something that is especially important in India, where India is the largest dairying country with the largest milk production in the world. And it's all thanks to small farmers. And it's thanks to a distribution network that is owned cooperatively by the farmers themselves. It's in fact the largest FMG in India is the dairy company that is in fact using the milk that you'll see in this image from a village called Ariapalayam, just south of, did I do it correctly? Yes, I'll start this just for a minute. You can see what it's like. This is in India. This is not in the Altiplano. It was supposed to start here, so I'm going to move it to where it's supposed to start. Here we go. There's the cow.
Milk production is by far the most reliable source of cash in the village. There are actually 5 organizations that exchange cash for milk in Ariapalayam. The most popular, the Village Milk Cooperative. Every day, over 1,000 liters of milk are collected at about 10 rupees per liter, depending on butterfat content. Villagers pay an annual fee of 11 rupees to participate. They bring their milk, a few liters at a time, to the co-op twice a day. Accounts are settled every 10 days or so. Many of the village cows have been bought through a government loan program, but too many people had trouble repaying, so government help to purchase a cow is no longer available. Cows are kept fresh through artificial insemination with the help of a visiting animal specialist. Milk production, wage labor, and petty shop operation are some of the ways in which women directly participate in the village cash economy.
That actually, I'll turn off that little thing for a second and go back to another image here. It raises a question that we don't quite have the answer to, and that I don't have the answer to, and that is the role of women in this cheese cooperative in Highland, Peru. We do know, however, that there are a couple of puzzles, and I'm going to do this in a minute and a half because I'm looking at the clock thinking I had more time than I did, but I don't. I want you guys to understand that family means different things in Latin America. I said that there's a thing called compadrazgo. Think of it as fictive kinship. Fake brothers, sisters, and fathers and mothers. If you have a godfather, you know what a compadre, you know what a padrino is. Families in Latin America, particularly in Peru, this relationship between the godparents of your own children and your relationship with those people who are to look after your children if something happens to you, it's more than just taking care of kids. It's extended family. And part of the puzzle that we've uncovered, or that certainly Ralph and Hoover are trying to understand, is what is it that when experts come in and say, you should market your cheese to Lima, you should be directly marketing to the supermarket chains, you could make an extra $3 on every cheese. And the residents of Pucara and the residents of Chichnaya say, we don't want to do that because that market's out of our control. It goes up and down. Instead, they market through a small number of people that are all connected by, according to Hoover, because we've been asking about this, by those kind of compadrazgo relationships. They're either direct family or they're extended or they're fictive family. They're compadrazgo relationships. So, what kind of entrepreneurship is this? Communities and individuals together, a local rationality built on a careful understanding of the local environment and based on a social network, so that your compadres will promise to pay and you will promise to sell to them the cheese at a certain rate for an entire year. You're locked into a forward contract. That's a lot of security. It's not as much money as you could make in the open market, but it gives you security. So for these guys, what I want to leave you guys with is maximization. Making your entrepreneur efforts into the next Apple is actually a very unusual thing, and it's certainly not in the Altiplano de Peru, the thing that you see the most often. Now, certainly there are entrepreneurs in Peru doing amazing, wonderful things and employing lots of people. But for communities like this, one of the questions to ask is maximizing your return, as the experts would suggest, the pathway, or is there something else going on about sufficiency? We have enough. And are we resilient? Can we deal with crazy stuff that may happen, like a frost or like a flood? And you see over and over and over again, this community get together to solve problems. I'll finish with this. It's a quote from Hugo Aguirre Torres, pero en fin, admiro a las comunidades rurales del altiplano que se dedican a muchas cosas y nunca mueren del hambre. De ellos debemos aprender mucho. To translate what he said, and you can look at this picture of some local residents, and it looks like a visitor from one of the community organizations here, all wearing their COVID masks, sitting in front of the village houses here. It says, well, finally, I really admire these rural communities of the Altiplano that dedicate themselves to and involve themselves in so many things. We've got handcrafts. We had cattle production. Now it's dairy. And they never die of hunger. From them, we can learn a lot. The reason that's especially true, and I'll finish up, I promise, is that in COVID, a lot of the income in the entire area from tourism, from people buying handicrafts, it's gone completely away. And these guys are not starving. Now, they're not making a lot of extra dough, but they're planning for the future. They have an extended network that goes internationally that's there to help them. And they have the local wherewithal to understand their local environment well enough that nobody's starving. That's where we are. I talk too much. You guys didn't talk enough. You should have shut me up. That's all, you guys. I think it's enough, don't you?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Erickson. That was amazing and very thought-provoking. And I do want to be cognizant of time, so if anybody has to hop off, feel free. But Dr. Erickson, if you have a few minutes, we can open the floor up for questions.
I'd love to hear from you guys. Oh, am I not visible? Oh my goodness. I turned myself off. I didn't mean to. It's not supposed to be radio after all.
I do have a question.
Sure.
I'm not sure if you addressed this at the beginning, but what initially drew you to this village specifically, and all the research you've done of it?
It's interesting. I started out thinking I would do a PhD on coastal communities in Peru and was ready to do that and started a PhD program with someone who is an expert in irrigation. And I was very interested in ritual and religion and how that interfaces with the management of water. Some of the things I mentioned, for example, about frost regulation and about fertilizer and how the land is maintained, that's all wrapped up in a lot of ritual and religious stuff as well that helps regulate the timing of those things, that demands community participation in those things, and that all, you know, it sets the timing and regulates what's going on. So I was going to do that, and then I ended up studying beef packing in Western Kansas instead. So I didn't get to Peru. So when Ralph Bolton, who I've known for a long time, said, Erickson, can you write the literature review for this paper that Hoover and I are working on? And that way you can, learn more about what I've been doing for the past 30 years, which I'd been hearing about forever. I said, sure. But as I said, these are the guys who've been doing that work. Ralph's been working in this community for almost 40 years. He's quite senior and still
That's
working there.
incredible.
So that's
Yeah.
what got me there. And I just like, the Andean area for me is very special, just like central Mexico, high altitude, very complicated civilizations that go back thousands of years, and really resilient people who are managing to push through in spite of really difficult circumstances. Makes it a fun place to work and learn about.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to learn from that community.
Daniel.
I have a question, Ken.
Yeah.
Do you see a pattern, for example, a difference between cities that are on the coast or towns near the coast versus towns inland in high altitudes? And do you see this pattern happening in different countries? Like, for example, in these recent elections in the United States, we see the coasts, the West Coast and the East Coast are all blue, but the inland is red. Is that a pattern in different countries as well?
I would suspect that it's a matter of perspective, that if you're flying over at a really high elevation, it looks like really dramatic differences. And then when you get closer, you realize that what was red and blue is sometimes little spots of purple. And I think that's a little bit true of Peru these days. Certainly coastal communities, they're doing irrigated agriculture. There's a mix of very large agriculture. When you go to the store, you're buying grapes from Peru and Chile, right? At certain times of the year. And right now we're moving into winter. So we're getting the last of the oranges from Peru and Chile. So you've got big agriculture, you've got small agriculture, you've got fishermen, and you do have folks with relationships high and low. In this community, there are people who have family that live in Lima or in other coastal communities, and they exchange stuff back and forth all the time. So yeah, there are huge differences, right? Coastal cities tend to be a little bit more wealthy. They have a longer tradition of that kind of plantation economy in some parts of Peru, not everywhere. You think about Ecuador and Guayaquil and its plantations, right? And the highlands are different stories. So yeah, they're very different environments. I'll agree with that. And well, I think the thing about zonation, this idea of altitude changes, you see very much similar things in Tibet and in Bhutan, where families and communities take advantage of different economic zones. Smart businesses do that too, right? We've got a little something over here, a little something over here. This business doesn't do well. This is going to be okay. It's not rocket science in that way. I think it's a good observation. It's a good question to ask. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you, Ken.
We'll do one final call for questions. But if that's all, thank you so much, Dr. Erickson. Like I said, that was absolutely incredible. We did record the presentation, and I'll have that up on our last lecture YouTube channel the next day or two. And we can also send that link out to all participants if you guys want to share it or watch it again. So thank you so much, Dr. Erickson.
Thanks, you guys. Put some more questions down. Oh, hi, who's that? Who's what, Jan? Oh, it's Jan.
And if anybody has any questions come up, you can also reach out to the last lecture email and we can pass those along to Dr. Erickson.
Great. You're sure welcome, guys. Thank you so much.
It was so good. Thank you so much.
It was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Ken. Good to see you.
Daniel, ¿dónde estás? ¿En dónde estás en este momento?
En Querétaro.
En Querétaro, el mero
Querétaro, Mexico. Yes.
Ay, no me digas. ¿Y qué estás haciendo?
I'm teaching.
What? In Querétaro?
Yes.
What a cool place. How is the weather? Are you getting any of this
nice.
rain or it's pleasant?
It's very nice, always fresh.
Yeah.
I feel like if I was in Bogota, Colombia, like always very stable weather, very fresh.
Well, I have an invitation to go to San Luis, and then it's just down the road.
Yes,
so
very near. Let me know. Let me know when you come.
We hope that COVID allows me to do it because I've already found the cheap flights. So
okay.
It's on my list. Thanks,
yeah,
guys.
and sometime soon we'll also invite you here to Querétaro.
I'm going to ask, I think that's, listen, you think you can avoid me? If I know you're in Querétaro, where I've never been and I want to go, thank you. I want to say hi to Ivan, who's here, and hopefully he'll unmute for a second and say hello to me if he's still listening.
Hola, ¿cómo estás?
Muy bien, ¿cómo estás, Ivan? Aquí tenemos varios alumnos míos aquí, ¿no?
Sí, pero no estaba por aquí a las 8, pero a las 9.
That's okay, because I talked too
pude-
long anyway. So it worked out well, I think.
Yeah,
It's good to hear your voice. We should plan a coffee.
yeah, I would be super down for that. That'd be awesome.
Ivan's one of my mentees. I'm lucky to have. Stella, how was this for you? Abby? Is it okay? It was all right?
Great.
People could nap, eat cookies, listen to me drone.
No, it was great. I'm an international business major, so I love
Oh,
it.
so you like this stuff?
Yes, absolutely.
As I said, this is me reworking something that was written, and I'm trying to rework it even a little bit more. So this was a great opportunity for me to kind of think through, and very often the process of talking about it, even if I'm not getting tons of feedback, helps me think about some stuff, and the questions you guys have and the comments you made help. So thanks for that. It's much
Thank you so much.
appreciated.
It was great.
Abby, how are you?
How are you? Thank you very much. Yeah, I thought it was a great presentation. I'm
was
not
fun
an
to hear.
IB person, so some of it was a little over my head, but I felt much more pulled in by the presentation.
What would be some things that could be better explained? That's a good observation. What was new for you? Let's put it that way.
I think that honestly, the whole thing was new for me. I really haven't thought much about economics on a level like that, much less in terms of developing countries. So really the whole framework was something that was beyond my scope of expertise.
There's a wonderful, if I could find it, there was a wonderful quote in there that I should have put up on the screen. I'll do it now. Oops, that's not the one I wanted. That's not the wonderful quote. That's my list of words. Oh yeah, the rural landscape of the Altiplano is littered with the physical evidence of failed projects and frustrated hopes. For example, greenhouses without roofs, wells with pumps that don't function, and broken passive home heating systems that never worked to begin with. That's another way to kind of tell this story, is that this has been a place that's been tough to find examples of lots of success, but when you do find success, it's usually communities managing their own thing. But it's not just that, because obviously you've got folks like Ralph and all of these NGOs and really people with big hearts who are in Peru who care about the Altiplano. There is a sense in which, there's kind of a moneyed elite in Peru that cares about export and big business, but there are also a lot of folks in Peru that see the beauty and the value to understanding and working on and supporting smaller places like Cusco. The tourist money that pours into this place, because these are interesting, vibrant, handcraft focused agricultural communities, it's important to the whole country, right? So that's a fun thing. And what you guys reminded me tonight, and it was that sidebar about the Kipu. Who talks about Kipu in business school? But see the link between this kid who had data analytics skills and was able to sort something out that an archaeologist had devoted his entire career with, but he didn't have that skill set. Put those two together and they came up with the thing. I should really add that into this conversation when I'm talking to a business school audience, because it's, Kipus are really important things for non-cash economies for like thousands of years, maybe 1,000 years in Highland Peru, and who knows about that, right? But it's good to know that it's there, and it can tell us maybe something about the way that non-cash economies worked at a time. It's kind of fun, I think. That's a good point, Abby. Thank you for that. Liana, how about you?
I don't know. It was really good. I love hearing you talk. I was going to take your ethnographic class next semester, but then I saw I was taken off the course.
Sad. I got a sad.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm so upset.
Anybody taking international marketing IB next time?
I took you last fall.
Oh, you did, yeah. But I mean, but the others, yeah, you were in here.
I recommend it, even though it was going to be different curriculum.
It's pretty chill. It's pretty fun. You have to do stuff. You have to talk in class, or I get mad at you. Rebecca, You're very, very quiet and hiding behind your name.
That's my mom. I don't know if she knows how to unmute.
It's Rebecca Jones is actually
Yes.
related to Mackenzie.
Yes.
Oh, well, welcome. I'm really glad we have parents along. I think that's fun.
Yeah, she does a lot with entrepreneurship in Guatemala, actually. So I don't know if she can unmute.
Oh, I'd love to hear that story. There's so much going on in that world. Maybe she'll unmute sometime, or you can tell us about it later. Maybe she could,
Yes.
type it in the text. That's cool. The other Kenneth Erickson is my other computer. That's so I can sort of see what it is that's on the screen for you guys. So I got to ask Daniel a question if I can. Are you teaching online or in person in Mexico right now?
Yes, online. I'm teaching by Zoom just like this, but which, by the way, I would like to invite you to one of my classes. It's about international business. And I always remember the case that you share with us about Hallmark cards.
Yeah.
We were studying the consumers and deciding about which type of message they wanted to send and selecting the cards of Hallmark. I thought it was
it's a
very
fun
good
one.
case.
It's a fun little mini case.
Yeah,
well,
let me know if you have a chance.
I was going to ask you if you would join my class next semester for a minute or two, if I could get you.
Yes, anytime. I will be honored to do that.
Would you be willing to talk about
Thank
airlines? Could you talk about airlines?
Yes, and anything, any topic, just let me know.
You're still doing the airlines for the thesis, yeah?
Yes. It's going to be one of the papers.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Danielle has been studying the startup of low-cost airlines in Mexico. And it's more than that, but it's a fascinating area to be working in. A lot of fun.
Yes, anytime, let me know, and I would like to invite you to one of my classes too.
Sería un gran placer. ¿Tienes el mismo email como antes?
Yes, I will send you an email.
Okay, please. Un placer. You flatter me. But all you got to do is wind me up and I'll talk for an hour and bore everyone to death. So a lot of fun. We were supposed to stop at 8 o'clock and I had it in my pea brain that we were going to 8:15. I don't know why. And that's why I was droning. And then it's like, oops, better pull it together here at the end. Skip those last 3 slides. But I guess it was okay because people stuck around.
No, that was incredibly interesting. It was worth the extra 20 minutes. So
oh, it's fun, but I need to figure it out so that it fits in an hour. Oh my goodness. But try it out on you guys first. You get to be the guinea pigs.
Yeah, and like I said, we did record this, so you'll have the recording.
Oh, I'm not sure that's a good idea.
Yeah.
It wasn't me, it was my evil twin Squiggy doing all that talking. Implausible deniability. All right, you guys, you're very kind to hang around. Anything else I can do for you?
Please say hi to Marcelo and Chris and Jerry. Tell them I say hello.
I was giving Yankee trouble this morning and giving Ostergaard trouble this morning because I'm so sick of being in this little cabin of mine with my hand sanitizer and my cordless drill because I had to hang curtains and stuff. So I went into the shop yesterday, and of course Kendall wasn't there. I can never catch him, but I saw some of the gang and they're all well. And I will check in with Marcelo. I need to do that anyway. Yeah. Marcelo is our PhD coordinator for the Moore School these days. Real busy guy. If you don't know, oh my God, ¿qué tenemos ya de? Ajá, tienes un co-pilot. Oh, that's too funny.
This is the fun thing about teaching online. I enjoy it even more.
Especially when you have Chewbacca as your co-teacher. That's hilarious. You have a lot more fun with your classes than we do. I think the dean would probably be surprised to see that. He might chuckle though. That's a great.
Yes, I remember you're also a Star Wars fan, right?
I do enjoy Star Wars a lot. You should have seen Ostergaard. He's a Coast Guard guy, so he had a view from the back of a ship. So you watch this giant wake and waves going on behind him. It was really beautiful and distracting. It was wonderful. It's great to see you guys.
Yeah, Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting, but feel
All
free,
right.
if you have any questions that come up, let me know.
Thanks, you guys. It was really super and a lot of fun for me, and I had fun working it up, and I've got to do it again in 2 weeks for the faculty. So I really got to tighten this story up. Scary, right?
Thank you, everybody.